I'm Rosie and this is my March wrap up. I managed to read 12 books in March, which is a massive increase from my TBR, which was basically 4 books, which I am very proud of. I've never managed to read that many books in a month before, I don't think. A lot of these books are currently at home because I went back home for a few weeks and took a bunch of books back with me because there's basically no room in my uni room in terms of shelving space. I've only got 4 of the books that I read in March actually with me. The first book I managed to read was Still Alice by Lisa Genova. I think that's how you say the name. I also went to see the film for this, and I will say that the film was not as good as the book. I quite enjoyed the book. I thought it was a really good representation of early onset Alzheimer's disease, which there's not enough exposure of. Early onset Alzheimer's disease is not really spoken of that much, and actually having a best-selling novel about it as well as a film that's won Oscars, it's really, really good, and I do recommend reading the book if just for that fact. I also read the duology of If I Stay and Where She Went by Gail Forman. These were lent to me by one of my friends and I really enjoyed them. I think I preferred Where She Went to If I Stay simply because it felt a lot more realistic. There were some aspects of If I Stay that kind of irked me a bit. They felt out of place really in comparison to the story, but I did really enjoy them. And I also saw the film for If I Stay, which nearly had me in floods of tears, and I very rarely cry at films or in books, so I do recommend reading those two. And yeah, they're really good. One's from the perspective of Mia and one's from the perspective of Adam as they deal with different aspects of their life, and it's just really good. I've also made a start on the Mortal Instruments series as part of the Mortal Read-Along, the link to which is in the description. I read City of Ashes on a train journey home and I really enjoyed it. It's so good. I couldn't wait for April to start the sequel, so I read City of Ashes as well, and I just really enjoyed both books. I'm really excited to continue on the series. If you're a fan of Harry Potter or Buffy or anything like that, you should really read the Mortal Instruments series. It's just really good. I also read Maisie Dobbs by Jacqueline Winspear. I can't quite remember the author's name. This is set after World War I, and it's about a woman who decides to become a private investigator. There's 3 parts to it, and the middle part is set of her time during the war, and this plays a role in how she approaches the case and the actual final conclusion of the case as well. And it was really interesting but incredibly slow to start. Like, the first section is important for setting up, but there wasn't really much to it. My favourite part was when you see her history and like how she came to be where she was during the war and all that, and that I found really interesting. It is a very well written book, I just don't think it struck that well with me. I also read A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray. This was another one that took a while to start, but once you got to the end it was really good. Like, she's quite good at developing interesting characters, though the main character did get a little bit annoying and some of the background characters just felt very flat, but otherwise it's an interesting book and I think I may continue the series. I also listened to the audiobook A Beauty Queens, also by Libba Bray. This one I enjoyed a bit more than The Great and Terrible Beauty because it just seemed a lot more lighthearted and funny, and I think that's maybe where Libba Bray's strengths are. But yeah, I found it really interesting to listen to, and I would definitely recommend it. It's very satirical and just, you kind of get really engrossed in the story. And now for the books I do actually have at university. The first is After Dark by Haruki Murakami. I enjoyed this. I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. It was quite a weird book. There were basically 2 separate storylines that didn't seem that linked until towards the end. And one's very much about someone who doesn't want to go home or sleep, who spends the night kind of walking around, and it's very much a character piece with that. Whereas the other one's about someone who has been asleep for 2 months, and it's much more mystical and very much like Sleep in a way. I found the distinction between the two to be quite interesting to read, and it's incredibly well written as well, and I do recommend reading it. I think I'm going to try and read some more Murakami books in the future, but that all depends on whether I can afford to buy any. I also read The Shock of the Fall by Nathan Filer. This is absolutely amazing. It's about a boy who has schizophrenia, and it's about how he deals with his brother's death, and it's written so well. Like, each section reflects his state of mind and how much medication he's on and what's happened in his life, and you can just feel it through the writing. It just hooked me and I got really engrossed in the story, and it's one that I would absolutely recommend reading, especially if you're interested in psychology or mental health. It's just a really affecting book. I also read Cinder by Marissa Meyer. I was so excited to start the Lunar Chronicles, and they lived up to expectations. I've only read Cinder so far, but I've got Scarlet waiting in my bookcase to be read, and I really enjoyed this. I absolutely love the retelling of the fairy tales, and I really liked how Cinder was not your typical heroine. She was a cyborg and a mechanic and very much her own person, and I really enjoyed reading a character like that. The whole story was really fascinating, and while it was predictable in some cases, I just really enjoyed getting into the world that Marissa Meyer created. It was just fantastic. Finally, the last book I read was A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I think that's how you say the name. This is another book I really enjoyed. I wasn't so sure to start with. Like, I've heard fantastic things, and it did take a while for me to get into the story, and it's not a quick read. Despite the short length, it does take a while to get into the story, and it's not one that you can read very, very quickly. It's one you have to actually get engrossed in and just enjoy, which I did. And it has pirates and smuggling and magic, and who could not enjoy a story like that? And it's even got parallel universes. Like, it's just amazing. That's it for my March wrap up, but I'm going to be really sneaky and add on my TBR list for April. For March, I gave myself the theme of reading kind of hyped up books, like Cinder and A Darker Shade of Magic. For April, I am going to give myself the theme of reading classics. I have a number of classics that are on my pile that I do want to get to. The first is one that I'm currently reading, and that is Miserable. I don't know how you say it. I'm about 500 pages in, and I'm really enjoying it. Like, I thought it would be really slow, and while Victor Hugo does go on a lot of tangents, when you get to the actual story, it's just amazingly well written, and I'm really enjoying it. It's gonna take me forever to get through though. I also want to read Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I'm really ashamed I haven't read this yet, so I really want to get to it. The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I remember really enjoying this when I was younger, and I think it would be quite a good read when I'm in deep stress from dissertation work. I also have Dante, The Divine Comedy. I don't often read books like this that aren't written in prose, that are instead written in kind of poetry format. I don't really know how to describe it because I don't really read them that much, but this is one that I just really want to read and get to because it just sounds really fascinating. And after reading Les Mis, it doesn't seem as long as I thought it would be. I also want to get to Tess of the D'Urbervilles. I've tried reading this and it took a while for me to get into, but I really want to finish it. I'm not a big fan of Thomas Hardy, which is part of the problem, but I'm hoping to get to it. Fingers crossed. Also have Memoirs of a Geisha. I'm not entirely sure if this counts as a classic or not, but it's one I want to read, and it's the closest I can probably get to. And it can kind of fit in with my TBR challenge of the month. Read and watch a book and its adaptation. And since this is a book and it's been adapted to a film, it would work out quite well, but it's either going to be this or Les Mis for that particular challenge. If I finish all these books, which is unlikely given I'm supposed to be writing my dissertation as well, and Les Mis is going to take me forever, but it's always good to have backups. I have Scarlet by Marissa Meyer, which I'm kind of counting because it's a retelling of a fairy tale, which basically counts as a classic. Like, why not? But I'm really looking forward to continuing the series and getting into this. I'm so excited. I also have All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven, which is completely unrelated to the theme, but it's one that I'm really wanting to read, and it also seems to be continuing the trend of reading one kind of mental health related book each month, which is currently what's been happening. But I've heard so many good things about this. I'm not entirely sure what it's about, but I'm really looking forward to reading it. So hopefully I will get to this as well. that's it for my March wrap up and my April TBR. Fingers crossed for getting through all these books, and I will see you next time. Goodbye!